Hi, Mandy. Good to have
Hello,
you.
Anne. No, and I'm really delighted to be part of it because, as you probably know, I'm really interested and love teenagers. I work with teenagers and young adults, but I also work with their parents. So I'll say a little bit about me and my kind of background. So I live in London, North London. I'm in Devon at the moment, but I also spend a lot of time in the northeast of Scotland. Most of my work is online. So I'll do webinars or short courses or one-to-ones with people. I'm a mum of two young people. So I've got a son who's 25 and a daughter who's 21 next week. And boy, have I learnt a lot from them. So I trained as a nurse, and then after nursing, I worked in learning disability fields. So I've got quite a lot of experience working with particularly young adults with learning disabilities. And then I did various energy medicines. I trained as a homeopath and EFT and various other things, and then came across this understanding, as in the three principles, understanding how life works, about 8 years ago. So at the time, my son was about 16 and my daughter about 12. And I would say that up until then, I had been a worried parent because I thought that's how it worked. I thought that's what love meant, was worrying about them, being concerned, everything being quite serious, needing to know where they were, what they were doing. It did come from love. Um, but then when I came across the principles, the first thing I heard was nobody's broken. So I can explain more about what I heard. But at the time, my son was about 16 and he was starting to go out. We live in North London. He was going into London. And I would spend my evenings worrying about him. I would say I've got quite a kind of Tarantino movie mind. So I would make up all sorts of horrors. And I can remember one night in particular, I was lying in bed about midnight. I heard a siren. And before I knew it, I made up a whole movie of James having been stabbed. He was in a hospital. I wasn't going to get there in time. And I was lying in bed in floods of tears and I suddenly thought, this is not okay. This is not good for me. It's not good for him, but it's really not good for me. And I was suffering from some kind of anxiety and health problems at the time. And it was kind of like a bit of a light bulb moment. I don't have to do this. And I realized at the same time messages that I'd heard from three principals teachers saying nobody's broken. And it was like, oh my God, James isn't broken. He's fine. And from then, I had a completely different relationship with parenting my two children. And a biggie was realizing that they have wisdom built in as well, which is part of the reason for the title of this. That hadn't occurred to me, bizarrely. Now, I knew about the vital force, I knew about innate health through homeopathy, but I hadn't really made the connection that my children have that, were born with that. And actually, the best thing that I could do for them was to kind of just love them. And it's not just love them, it's love them enormously, but actually stop trying to control everything. So it was over a couple of years, really, I suppose, I could feel myself letting go of that need to control. I mean, I was scared for them a lot of the time. I was brought up in a little Devon village, and here I was living in North London. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know how teenagers lived in places like that and survived in places like that. Also, what I didn't know for a while was that they were perfectly equipped to do that themselves. So James was a 16-year-old equipped to deal with being a 16-year-old lad living in North London. I was looking at it from my perspective, from my mindset, and picturing all sorts of horrors. So I'm going around the houses a bit, but understanding that they were both born with wisdom, innate health, was huge for me. And I kind of realized that sometimes they would misunderstand, as we all do. Sometimes they'd get a bit lost. But when I absolutely knew that they were always on course, that they always had this innate health, and but for their thinking in the moment, that kind of seemed to take them away from the wisdom. It couldn't actually, it was always there. So I would see them. I mean, with my daughter, they were very different characters, my kids. They get on really well, very different. But with my daughter as well, I could see her kind of almost like going to the edge of the bungee elastic before she'd ping back. And me knowing that she would always ping back was really helpful. I could, I might actually send you a blog that I wrote about that. I could lovingly wait until she got through this herself and had her own insights into whatever it was, whether it was friendships, relationships, schoolwork. And sometimes I wouldn't know quite what to do. So I would try and listen, try and give advice, try and make a cup of tea, all sorts of things I'd come up with. And then I realized actually there is kind of nothing to do. And that was kind of counterintuitive for a while, or felt it, but now it comes really easily. And I think the two words that I use a lot are love and understanding. So I know without a shadow of a doubt that I can love my teenagers and all the other teenagers that I work with, actually. And I've worked with some great kids. But also having an understanding is really useful. And I think I'm curious by nature. So it's not just an understanding about how the mind works, as in a thought will come in and then we start to believe it and we act out from that place. So with a lot of teenagers, it's might be, oh God, that person's looking at me. And there they immediately make a movie. God, I must look really odd. It must be this outfit I'm wearing. My hair's not right. And they go into a whole thought storm. My understanding that that's how life works, and then sharing that understanding with them has been phenomenal. We still get lost in thought, but having that understanding as a backdrop is so helpful. But also, what I'm particularly interested in is a kind of mind body world. So, having trained as a nurse and then homeopathy, I think helping people to understand what's going on physiologically and environmentally is really useful as well. So, helping teenage understand the hormonal changes that they're going through is really useful, because I think what we all want, I mean, often we say we just want to be happy. I think what we want to do is make sense of our experience, because what so many people will be saying is, "Look, help me understand what's going on here. I don't know what's going on here. I don't know why I'm suddenly struggling with friendships. I don't know why I'm so stressed with exams." And it's lovely for me to say, "Oh, I do." Let me explain. And it's so logical. And I think particularly with teenagers and kids and young people, they seem to get this understanding really quickly because there's such a logic to it. It's okay, that makes sense. For a while, I thought there was something wrong with me. Now I realize there isn't anything wrong with me. I can move on. There's nothing to do. So, yeah, love and understanding. I think it's understanding what people are going through, but also understanding what growing up is like. I mean, I don't know what it was like for you, but I'm 60. I can really remember being a teenager, um, and not knowing what was going on. So obviously thinking that I was doing stuff wrong. That made sense to me. So I would try and change my environment or change my friendships or change the way I looked, thinking that that would bring me peace or happiness. And of course, I now know that that didn't help at all. But that went on for a long time because there was nobody around me to help me understand this is normal. That's also something that I say to teenagers, that we're all very ordinary, but we have extraordinary moments. And that can be helpful as well. It's very ordinary to feel stressed. It's very ordinary and normal to feel worried. And I think there seem to be a lot of young people at the moment. Some people blame social media, who knows, but people who think that feeling down immediately means that there's something wrong with them. Whereas actually, when we can help people understand the roller coaster of life, that can be so helpful. And it's like, it's fine to feel down. We want all the emotions of life. And there might be stuff that occurs to you to do while you're feeling down or up. I know some people, and I was like this as well, that get more uncomfortable with feeling kind of excited and elated. I could do the down quite easily, but the elation was quite tricky. So again, just helping people to understand what life is like, that we have this emotional roller coaster, and that it's like the immune systems, our psychology will help us settle again. And I've even sort of worked with people who suddenly start enjoying exams, whereas before they were terrified of them, and start playing games with their kind of emotions or their feelings. It's like, oh, okay, I'm feeling really stressed. That's interesting. So they become curious as well, but having fun with it. So I think there can be a lightness around being a teenager or being a young adult. Now, that's not to take away from the fact that some people are really struggling. And I've worked with a few people who usually referred to me via their parents, and I will always talk to the parents as well, have 1 or 2 sessions with the parents, partly to explain how I work, but more to tell them about the logic of how life works, and helping the parents to realize they're not doing anything wrong. They're doing the best they can, and they don't need to be frightened. So parents sort of having those eureka moments where they think, oh, okay, this is all quite normal. Because I think, well, I've run 2 now 6-week series of webinars for parents of teenagers, and that's been amazing, just for people to come together and have a laugh and share their experiences, because sometimes you can feel like you're going completely bonkers, particularly when you're a teenager, maybe at 13 or 14, and they've loved you for bits since the day they were born, and suddenly they seem to hate you. It's like, what's that all about? So having a discussion around that and explaining it can be really helpful for parents and the young people as well. I've lost my thread.
Are those webinar series available for people to watch now?
No, we deliberately didn't record them. Well, we recorded them for the people that were on it, but one of the issues around that I found with parents, and I can remember struggling with this myself, was that I didn't want to declare that I was struggling, because actually all parents are struggling, but it felt as if I said I'm really struggling here, it would be like a deck of cards and everybody would collapse and I'd be responsible for that. So there's this weird kind of collusion that goes on. The school gate syndrome is a bit like Facebook quite often. Hi, how are you? How was your holiday? Big smiles and that sort of thing. And behind the scenes, I mean, some of the parents that have been on the webinar series are really successful, business women. Really, everyone looks at their lives and thinks they're doing amazingly, but behind closed doors, they're on their knees, or were. So actually creating a space where a safe space for people to discuss those sorts of issues, I think is really important. I have thought about doing a kind of a different kind of webinar series that could be shared, but I haven't got there yet. But it's also the same with teenagers. Now we want to create a space where teenagers and young adults can talk about their issues, but very often they don't have the language for it. It can almost happen overnight for some. One day they're feeling really great, the next day they're feeling very anxious, and they have no idea. They haven't even got the language to describe it. All they know is that they're feeling rubbish, or they've got tummy ache. So as parents, the more kind of open and understanding we are, the more we can provide a safe environment for them. For me, I mean, what I often say to parents, sometimes we have to just step out of the way, but we can still do stuff. We can have a fridge full of food that they like. We can keep their washing up to date. We can, be available. And it's a fine line between kind of watching them like a hawk and just being available. So actually helping parents to understand what they can do, because there is some doing, can be really useful. But also not being frightened. I mean, my son was, he got quite anxious at 16 and I had no idea what to do. This is before I had come across the principles. My first thought was, what have I done wrong? And this is very common with parents. Was it because I couldn't breastfeed him? Was it because I went back to work too quickly? The whole range. And of course, it was none of those things. So another thing we say to parents is, don't feel guilty. You've done nothing wrong. So let's just look at now. Let's be present now and see how we move forward. Sorry, you look like you're going to ask a question, and
I'm still. What I've got in the back of my mind is, you said about parents being frightened. Being in bed and hearing the siren and making up all this story. But it's not an unreasonable worry in London at the moment, because lots of people are getting stabbed, right? So what would you say to people who think that they should carry on worrying about that? Because, well, what if it does happen?
Yeah, I think, the word responsibility came up for me then, that I certainly thought that a responsible mum almost carried my kids around in my head, so I would ready for action. Now, what I didn't know was that the calmer or the more at ease I am, the more able I am to respond when needed. So I realized that actually I was perfectly equipped to deal with whatever came up in the moment, and that actually preempting it or rehearsing it, disaster planning, I used to call it. I thought I was great at disaster planning. Didn't work for all sorts of reasons. One, it would take me out of the present moment, so I wasn't aware of what was going on around me. The other thing is the physical effect it was having on my body wasn't good. I wasn't sleeping well. I was in quite a high adrenaline state a lot of the time. So when the children were both in the house, I was often exhausted or not present. So that's what I would say to people. And it seems like a big ask to begin with, but actually we start to realize that that is so much more helpful when we know actually I'm really equipped. I'm genetically made to respond to my kids' crisis. What's that expression? Uh, Flight or freeze, or whatever the word is. Yeah, flight, fight, freeze. There's another one apparently, which is gather. That's particularly what women do. So when there is a crisis, it's kind of be still, check out where everybody is. It all happens in a moment, and then you know what to do. And we do know what to do. And there have been crises with both kids. And often I've just responded without even any thought. It's almost like wisdom takes over. And I've responded really appropriately. And then afterwards, I might go to pieces. But actually, for me, there is a trust that I will know what to do. And there's, practical things like I do have my phone within reach. It's not in the bedroom, but it's outside the bedroom door. So there are I do sometimes say to them, "Have you got a key?" So there are practical things that just occur to me. It's not that I've got a checklist of things that I need to tick off. If it occurs to me, I'll say it. With my daughter, it was quite interesting because when she started going out and about, whereas my son would always let me know if he was going to be late or where he was going, my daughter didn't. And it was like, that was really unexpected. And so we'd kind of get into a bit of an altercation about that. It's Jen, you need to let me know where you're going to be. And why? I'm 16, and she'd get all kind of variated. And then one day I said to her, sweetheart, it's really not because I don't trust you. This is for me. Do this for me. It's because I settle better. And as soon as she knew that it was a kindness for me, then it all made sense. But it wasn't till we had the conversation from a place of kind of honesty. And I often say to them, I know it seems bonkers. I know that it looks like I'm overreacting, but help me out with this one. So having that kind of dialogue, a partnership, that's what I often say to the parents as well. Let's get some kind of dialogue going and some sort of partnership. Because there are some things that really do make sense. When my daughter's at uni, I don't give it a thought, of course. But once she's at home, it's kind of, sweetheart, I'm still in that zone. I know you're nearly 21, but I'm still in the zone where I'd love to know what time you're coming home. And she just laughs, okay, mum. And she'll let me know. And it's nice and it's loving and it's thoughtful. So we can get to that place. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it does feel a bit difficult to start with.
Yes, it's a lot different for them as well if you're coming from explaining what it's like for you rather than you should do this and this is how because you're going to get the opposite reaction anyway if you do that.
Absolutely.
And the other thing I was thinking was that if you're trusting them, as you said, you're relaxed and you're trusting that they have what they need, that they are what they need, that they have all the resources that they need, then they can trust that they have. Whereas if you're all the time not trusting it, then they're getting the idea, well, maybe I don't. And which is a lot of the time the way that most of us been brought up, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of this is I had to relearn stuff or have an insight into something different. And the trusting bit, it's not trusting that they won't make mistakes. It's knowing that they will. Or what is a mistake? That's a whole different dialogue. But it's knowing that they will do things. My daughter, 2 weeks into uni, too much to drink in a nightclub, broke her foot. 2 weeks into year one at uni. And I was so pleased that my first response was, "Oh, sweetheart, that's tough. Let's see what we can do about it." There was no sense of how ridiculous, how other people, I mean, her dad luckily has the same approach as me, but other people would be like, "Aren't you furious? All that money." And it's like, well, no, she didn't kind of go do it on purpose. So it kind of, that trust allows compassion, well, love and understanding. And also sometimes saying, not sure that was such a good idea. Yeah. But trusting that them knowing that they have that innate health, innate wisdom is so, I mean, it's just life changing for them.
Yeah, and we all have different experiences, don't we, as teenagers? Because you said when did I remember when I was a teenager? My teenage years were very different, but the main struggle I had was that I thought that uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, particularly uncomfortable feelings, meant something important, and that I had to do something about it. And at the same time, I also listened to thought, didn't realize it was just thought, and listened to thought that was telling me I should be working harder, and if I enjoyed myself, that meant, I wasn't good enough and I had to work even harder, and I shouldn't, if I was having fun, that was wrong. Mm-hmm. Which of course doesn't make any sense at all, but I didn't realize it was, I at that time, I didn't know the difference between wisdom and thought. And that's a big thing, because I thought that all this thought that was telling me you should be doing this and you should be doing that was wisdom.
Absolutely.
And so I got very confused.
I think yes, and I think as parents we can almost give our kids permission to listen to their wisdom, to be in touch with kind of gut feeling, even if it looks counterintuitive at the time. So I will say to my kids, the same way I will to myself, does this feel like I'm just shirking responsibility, or does it feel like I need a break? And actually, the more we get in touch with our feelings, I think that's where the messages are. It's not analyzing, it's just sort of going through life, knowing that we're feeling, thinking beings. Now, the difficulty, I think, sometimes is when kids' wisdom is saying you need to get up and move, or they're supposed to be sat in a classroom. And actually, so it feels like that they have this kind of intuition to do something, and then it's being slapped down. Now, I remember working with one young girl who was really struggling at school because she was challenging the teachers. And I can remember saying to her, "Sweetheart, you're almost too mature for your own good. You're going to have to ride this out for a year or two, put up with it. And then when you get to uni," because she was in danger of not going to uni because school weren't happy with her. "So when you get to uni, you'll have a whole different experience." And it took a couple of sessions for her to realize that. And we would kind of talk about it. And I would say, just zip it for a while. Which kind of makes sense, because it is what it is. And then she left school. She's thriving at uni. She's in her second year. And she's so pleased, because if she had carried on that path, and it made complete sense to her to fight against authority at that time, understandably, it is a bonkers system sometimes. We look at our education system and we think this is bonkers. Sometimes it's really helpful to say to young people, if you can, just stick with it. It's only, I don't know how many weeks a year, 28 weeks a year or something. It's not always the best advice, but sometimes that's exactly what they need to hear. Life's tough sometimes.
And I think it's important that you were hearing and agreeing with her. Yes, it is bonkers.
Absolutely.
It's not you. You are. It is bonkers, and your intuition is telling you the right thing.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in this situation, that's the way it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. And also letting parents say that, because so many poor parents they feel that they're lying to their children by saying school's really important, blah, 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 whereas the parents are seeing it as bonkers as well. And I know so many parents I know quite a few parents who are home educated. I know some who are considering home education, but most of the people I know, their kids are still at school. But the parents being able to say to them, "I know that teacher's awful. That was really out of line." But actually in partnership again, rather than against the child, because the parents often don't know what to do. They're scared as well.
And again, if they can see why the teachers are like that, and it's nothing personal to them, but and it's nothing, and the teacher's not doing anything wrong as such. They're doing the best that they can in the situation that they've got.
Yeah.
It's not that it's personal, or that the teacher can't do anything about it either. Most of the time, I'm sure they would rather have it much more free and easier and more not logical, but more heartfelt, maybe. Yeah,
I think so. And I think, I mean, I hope that people don't think that this is saying, you know, that people need to bow down, because that's not what this is about at all. This is about empowerment, and it's actually enabling our young people to make some choices and actually say, you know, you've got the skill and the wisdom and the power to make some really cool decisions here, and let me help. Let's have a discussion around it. We don't know where it's going to go, how it's going to end up, but let's at least talk about it. So, you know, not being frightened of our young people coming back from school and needing to sound off and say how terrible it is and what an awful day they've had. Not trying to shut that down, actually allowing, I mean, what I find more and more with teenagers, actually, well, with all the people I work with, is the more I listen and allow them to talk it out, people will talk themselves into an insight. So they'll talk and talk and talk and talk, and I'm quite happy with that. And then at some point they'll say something like, God, I really made that story up. Or it's not like that at all. And you can see the light bulb moment. But if we shut that down and try and kind of start teaching the principles or whatever too soon, it's not giving people the opportunity to actually clear their own misunderstanding.
yeah. It's like you said, that it's recognizing that they have their own wisdom, they have everything that they need, and just being there and knowing that, and being in that space where you know it, and you're, because if, like I said before, if you know it, then they're going to, oh yeah, it, rather than, as you said, being told it should be this way or it should be that way, or oh no, you don't need to feel this, or you don't need to do that, or
Yeah. I worked with a young woman about 2 or 3 years ago. She'd come out of uni, and when she started at university, she was fun-loving, sporty, having a really good time. She came out with a label of depression and anxiety and on antidepressants, and told that she would be like that for life. Now, she shared a house, shared a house with 4 other young women, all of whom were on antidepressants by the time they finished uni. So this young woman, she said that she wanted to go traveling, but she didn't think she could because of her depression, and she was really low. And I started saying to her, you know, there's nothing wrong, honestly. You know, I know it looks like it, and I get that some of the experts have told you. And she just lit up. She said, I don't need the antidepressants. And I'm like, well, hang on a minute. So it's like, I knew she didn't, but we talked more, and she, within 6 months, she's traveling around the world off the antidepressants, not depressed, sharing the principles. I was really hoping she was going to do a session with you, but she's too busy traveling. She was really keen, so maybe one day. But she just needed to talk herself into the understanding that she wasn't broken. Bless her, she had believed lots of messages. Of course she had. Experts were telling her. What had happened was that she was struggling with some of her coursework. That's how it started. Who wouldn't? And that's what I was saying to her. Who wouldn't struggle with coursework? But she always got it done. But she was advised by her tutor, go to the doctor. So that started the kind of, you know, the ball rolling into this label of depression and anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that some people don't need a lot of support. Again, I'm not saying that medication isn't needed sometimes. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying we need to look at people's individuals and always point to the unbrokenness. Even if life is still chaos for them around the outside, if we can sit there in kind of love and understanding, almost like fanning their own wisdom, that's the best. It's not just the best, that's an amazing thing that we can do for people.
And never telling them that you're going to be like this for life.
Crazy, huh? Yeah, well, yeah, how's that ever helpful? I mean, I'm not a big campaigner. I'd love to be doing more work in unis, but that's not my particular path, it seems, at the moment. So my particular interest is working with parents of teenagers or young adults, helping them to settle and see what's going on, because having a settled, peaceful home environment is going to be really helpful for the teenagers.
Yeah.
I think I might have spoken to you that I think it was the comedian Harry Enfield in the UK had this character called Kevin, who was a teenage boy. And I think we've kind of latched onto that. And I can remember when my James was coming up to 13, people were warning me, oh, it's all going to start. And I was waiting for this awful period that was going to be, if I believe the experts, 7 or 8 years of hell, basically. It's like, get your crash helmet on, batten the hatches, here it comes. And it's like, let's stop that message. Now, of course, there are going to be turbulent times with all those hormones going on and having to be at school and that sort of thing. But we don't need to be battening the hatches. I loved my kids being teenagers. I just find it a really exciting time. Yes, there were some challenges, but actually I learned so much from them. But also, I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but in this country, there's an element of laughing at teenagers when actually they're really struggling. Now, if they're staying in bed till 2 or 3 in the afternoon, if they're morose at the dinner table, it's because they're not feeling good. And that should bring out some compassion and love in us. But we kind of tend not to do that through our own embarrassment, who knows? But I think actually holding and supporting our teenagers as they go through those turbulent times is surely better than kind of teasing them, laughing at them, calling them grumpy, whatever it is. So that's a bit of a soapbox for me, but I do want to kind of reframe. And we've got teenagers doing some amazing things in the world at the moment. I mean, they always have, but I think we're maybe better at listening. I don't know. But if only we do stop to listen and ask them, for instance, what are their views on politics? What are their views on climate change? What my kids come out with, they might not have all of the, intellectual understanding, whatever. But if I listen carefully, I can hear their integrity, their sense of justice, their love for the world. So it's like, well, let's just settle and listen to them because they've got what's needed.
Yeah, when you were talking about the girl at university with the depression, it just reminded me of when I was in general practice, so long before I knew about this understanding. But as we know it at some level anyway, right?
Yes.
And when I was in general practice as a trainee, there was a girl in the village who had gone away to university from a really nice, loving family. She'd gone away to university, and in the first term, she had worked so hard, and she was putting so much pressure on herself. Her family certainly weren't putting pressure on her, but she was putting pressure on herself to get it all done and to achieve and so on. And she had a psychotic breakdown. And her friends who she was living with obviously called the doctor, and the doctor came and they admitted her to psychiatric hospital and gave her a label of that it was psychotic and she was schizophrenic, and they gave her medication and so on, which her parents were obviously not very happy about. They brought her home and she recovered on medication and went back to university. But her parents went this time and said to the friends, if anything happens to her again, if she starts to go downhill again, call us. Don't call the doctor, call us, right? So that's what happened. She started to get into the same pattern again, and the friends recognized what was going on and called the parents, and they brought her home. And they knew that the doctor that I was training with, who'd known her all her life, believed that any symptoms we had, whether they're physical, even if you broke an arm, he thought that there was an underlying emotional cause for it, that we
right.
And I have to say, by the time I'd done 6 months of training with him, I believed it even more than he did, or they did, both the partners in the practice. So, but because he knew her already he knew her from being very little, he asked me if I would talk to her about it. So she came to see me, and it was so obvious to me, well, yeah, your brain was, your mind was just giving you an escape. It just all got too much. And some of us get physical symptoms, and some of us get very tired, and some of us, the mind just has that way of escaping, decides I'm out of here. right? So it takes you somewhere else. And she said, oh yeah, that's exactly what happened. It was, I went to this lovely place. There were all these bunny rabbits, and she was describing it all to me, and how much better it was where she was. And I'm like, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? You know, it doesn't mean you're psychotic. It doesn't mean you're schizophrenic. Forget about all the labels. Your mind was just doing what it needed to do to get you out of there, because it was all just too much. And she was like, oh yeah. It is that simple, isn't it?
It's that simple. It's that simple. And I think we all have our different safety valves. And when we do get really het up and we've got a load of stuff going on, the old thought storms happening, when we need to kind of let off steam sometimes. And that's like talking it through can be really helpful. Who knows, there's so many different ways we can do that. Some kids get into sport, some kids, but if it's suppressed, if it's constantly suppressed, which it often is, then we will have physical symptoms. It just kind of makes sense. It's got to come out somewhere. It's an energy. But actually creating an environment where people understand, oh, I'm getting stressed, I can talk it through, or I can go, I don't need to be frightened of it.
And I think also it's I don't need to listen to all the thinking that's making me feel that in
absolutely.
the first place. That's how people get like that, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, it's just letting it kind of wash over. Seeing it from we all use the kind of picture of the sky, the blue sky and the clouds going through. That's so true. And sometimes, we can't see anything for the clouds. And even then it's like, well, now's the time to be gentle with myself, not just add more panic and more worry. We don't need to listen to those thoughts. But, I've been around the principles for 8 years and I still get caught. Of course I do. We all do. Something will kick in and it's off I go. And before I know it, I can't see anything for the fog. But quite quickly now I think, oh, okay, I'm in a fog again. That will pass. And it will pass. So teaching that from a really early age, imagine, there's some wonderful work happening in schools now, sharing this kind of understanding. And I have great hope around that, so that our teenagers and young people learn very early on. They know it when they're really little and then kind of forget it. But I do think we're also living in this kind of unnatural world. We were saying earlier that our wisdom's telling us to do one thing, but authority or whatever is telling us something different. And that's just kind of the way it is at the moment. So, like we were saying earlier, understanding it's a bit of a bonkers world at the moment can be really helpful, and not getting lost in that.
Well, the other thing about that is, if you don't get lost in the thought about that, then wisdom will show you a way around it. Will show you how to sort that, or where you need to go in that. Although your wisdom might be saying, I need to fight against that's really not, maybe if you don't do that, if you don't listen to the thinking that that's how I need to do it, if you just listen to the wisdom and sit with the wisdom, then it will show you a different way that you can do it. We're not saying put up with it, but that there will be a way around it. And this wisdom is going to show us, like you said, with the young people, it's going to show us ways of sorting out all that seem to be problems in the world.
Yeah. And I think with that as well, that what's really helpful for people is to understand that there's this kind of universal life force, I'll call it, but powering through all of us. It's coming from the same place. We're all plugged into the same stuff, but we're all unique expressions of that life energy. So we will show up very differently. So some of us will be campaigners, some of us will be quieter change makers, some of us, but who knows what we're going to. So it's helping teenagers be okay with who they are and how they're showing up in life. Because there are so many messages, even with the climate change, for instance, you need to be going marching, you need to be doing this. That's great for a lot of people, wonderful, but not everybody. So we all have our own ways of responding. And I say to my kids, that my son particularly, he seems to have inherited my creative Tarantino movie mind. My daughter hasn't in the same way. So I kind of say to Jay, well, that's part of the territory, but isn't it great that we understand how it works? Neither of them have got my freckles, but they might have one day. But there's bits that they will express life differently, and being okay with that is just wonderful for them.
Yes, it is, because all of us, and it may seem like you're not doing something about whatever it is, global heat, the global warming and so on. But in fact, you are, just by listening to your own wisdom and following your own wisdom, you are doing something about it, because you're doing what you're being guided to do. So, yeah.
I think that's really important as well. It's often I'll say to people, what does success actually look like to you? And they'll come up with that, the whole list. And it's like, well, actually, you could be the person in the classroom that's just feeling good about themselves, and that will pulse out this lovely energy to the rest of the class. And actually, people understanding that can be, and it's something that I didn't used to talk about a lot, because I thought it doesn't really fit in. But actually, people love to hear that. Actually, the more settled I am, my body likes it, my blood pressure is going to be nice and stable, my pulse is nice and stable, not too much adrenaline coursing round. That's a nice place to be. And the more I'm in that place, the more I'm going to infect other people. It's like a love virus. I'm going to infect other people with that. So again, it might look like not doing anything. And, you look at animals, cats, for instance, they look like they're doing nothing. Actually, they're pulsing out lovely energy. So I think helping teenagers realize that, what does doing look like? What does success look like? And helping them to realize that for every human being, there's a different way of being, can be really helpful. I was working with a young girl recently, actually. She's 13 and she was struggling to make friends at school. And I said, what do you like doing? She said, oh, I like reading. So, well, that's almost unusual these days with young people. I said, what's your particular favourite? She said, Agatha Christie. And I'm like, oh, no wonder you haven't got any friends at school. We were having such a laugh about it. It's like, what does she talk to people about? So what she does at home was very different. She's now got a small group of friends who also like stuff like that. But she was thinking that she had to kind of deny who she was to fit in. She's an incredible, unique, beautiful, amazing young woman who felt that she wasn't fitting in. And I said, well, you are unique. That's true. And there's nothing wrong with that. And you will find, it's sort of reassurance sometimes, you'll find somebody. And now she's just got a really small group of friends, but that's enough for her to feel secure. She thought she was having to clip, bonsai herself, clip bits off, deny bits. Very hard, very hard.
It is, and it's much more difficult to make friends when you're not being yourself.
Absolutely.
Because they're not attracted to you trying to be something different.
No. You were talking earlier, actually. Oh no, so talking to this friend of mine, that a lot of people don't know where to go for help when they have help. So I know with my kids, they would never dream of going to the teachers if they felt they were being bullied. That's just something you don't do. So that's crazy for a start. If they were struggling, they wouldn't go to the teachers. So it almost felt like there was this kind of there's all sorts of reasons they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't want other people to know about it. They didn't feel that they would be properly listened to. There were all sorts of things. So it was like no-go area. That really needs to change and is changing in some schools. But also, I think at home, if we can create an environment where we can have that dialogue without, and sorry, I'm going around in circles here, but let the young people own it. So rather than tell me that you're being bullied, so I will go and sort it out, it's actually again, partnership. How are we going to sort this out? What would be helpful? So actually, I think that's what our teenagers need to know, is that we're by their side, which is different from being on their side, if that makes sense. And saying to them, look, I've never done this before. I've never been the mum of a 15-year-old, 16-year-old before. I'm learning as well. Rather than seeing ourselves, we should know how to do this.
Yes, again, that is again about letting them trust in that they know that they have what they need inside, isn't it? Not just yeah.
I think also because the work that I've done with young adults with learning disabilities has been really interesting as well, and working with some of the parents, because that can really look like people can't be successful or can't be good members of society, whatever. And that I love to completely debunk that. I remember working with a mum whose daughter was non-verbal and she used a wheelchair, and her mum was saying, well, how can she ever be a useful member of society? I love her to bits, but she's never going to get a job or do anything. And after about 10 minutes, her daughter was kind of wheeled into the room, and she was so full of gorgeous energy that the whole room lit up. Well, there you go. That's her contribution. She's just, people light up when she comes in the room. Well, wouldn't that be wonderful if maybe she could get a job in Parliament or something, just to light people up. But that's her unique expression of herself. So I'd want to be around her. Yeah.
Yes, and plenty of people would. It's yeah.
Yeah, she's a joy. Mm-hmm.
And that's where also people might be wondering, well, where's their wisdom? How can you think that they have this wisdom that you're talking about?
Well, this young woman, I mean, she was so less cluttered by thought that it almost felt like you were actually connected to pure wisdom, to pure joy. Now, obviously there's thought playing out, but she wasn't taking it seriously. So it wasn't it looked like she wasn't grabbing it and trying to make stories out of it. It was just passing through, and she was just an expression of absolute presence in the moment, just being. But then there are also people who, we're a better society for caring for people, is how I see it. So there are people who are very unhappy, people with quite challenging behaviours, or I don't know, real upset, and we need to care for them and look after them and be kind and loving to, it's just, there's something around acceptance, I think, and not trying to change people. If we can offer an environment, I work with an organisation that provide housing and support to people with autism, and what we talk about is creating a lovely atmosphere, being safe. That's what, when people are safe, wisdom is more likely to show up, when they're feeling safe.
I was talking to someone the other day who went through a really bad depression, and it might have been anorexia as well, but when she got to her lowest state, she just knew that she needed help. Yeah. So that's wisdom showing you that you need help, and there's nothing wrong, as you said, with helping temporarily, as long as you know that wisdom is there, and the wisdom is showing them that they need help in that moment. That doesn't mean that they don't have wisdom, or that they don't have everything they need. They have everything they need, and what that's telling them is, at this moment, you need rest, and you need somebody to make decisions for you, and you need somebody to look after you temporarily while you get physically better.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes people actually want to hand over the control temporarily, sometimes by listening carefully to them, because they might think the only answer is going to the doctor. So if we explore that a little bit more, and we find out actually what they're asking for is deep rest, there might be another way of doing that will occur to them through. And I think the more we can offer people a kind of safe place to talk out their stuff, the more they're going to relax into a state where they can hear the other options. When we're all caught up, we can only see one thing. We become tunnel visioned, and it's like, it's got to be this. Well, actually, let's just, with it can be just a hug for a while, just saying, to my daughter, just cry it out for a while. Just let's see what comes up. There's no rush. Let's see what comes up.
So how are you working? If people wanted to get in touch with can you work with people online?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And most of my work is online. And in fact, the webinar series, which will start again in September, I do an evening one and a morning one, so that last time I got a few people from Singapore for some reason. So kind of, I want to make it as accessible to people as possible. So very rarely do I do face-to-face now.
Sorry, that crackled a bit. So very rarely?
Very rarely face-to-face.
Okay.
I do a day in the park coaching sessions, where we go to a park in London and just talk for the day. They can be really impactful, but often for the teenagers and the parents of teenagers, it's online. Via my website.
So there'll be a link underneath the video to our page, on your page on our website, that has all the links on it, so that they're all in one place. It's easy to find them that way.
And I think my kind of strap line now is helping people make sense of life. So often people don't even know where to go, and the first step might be, let's just try and clear some of the cobwebs and make sense of what's going on, and then we'll know where to go. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's lovely. Thank you very much, Mandy. That's been brilliant.
Thank you. No, I've enjoyed that. Yeah. I'm sure there's other things that I wanted to talk about, but that sounded good.
They'll,
Thank you for making it
they'll
so
come
easy.
yeah, and
Yeah.
you can always add comments underneath the video, and people can ask questions underneath the video and make comments too. So
Lovely.
it's an ongoing conversation. So
Yeah.
nothing to stop you adding more.
No, it's
So,
fabulous what you're doing. So, good on you. Good
thank
on you,
you very
girl.
much.
All right.
All right. See you again soon.
See you again. Bye-bye.
Bye.